A very good morning, all of you. Today, we will discuss romantic poetry, the various features of romantic poetry, and I'll introduce to you as to what romantic movement in English literature is all about. So, I'm sharing with you a piece which you can use in your answers. Of course, you'll have to modify it a bit. Though I have already taken up this in the class that I took yesterday virtually, but still, because some of you were not there. So, let us start. Now, what was the romantic movement in English poetry, or what do we understand by romantic poetry? So it started as a conscious reaction. Please remember that. It was a reaction against neoclassical poetry of the 18th century. Towards the close of 18th century, the great intellectual, moral and religious changes which marked the end of the age of reason gained momentum and resulted in romantic movement. So basically what you have to remember, the reaction thing. It is a reaction against whatever established norms were there of the 18th century, right? Like all great moments, the romantic movement resulted from the preparations of the preceding age gone by, 18th century. Its greatness lay in the way in which it drew together formerly scattered elements of thought and feeling into a new and significant pattern. Thoughts and feelings can lie inertly side by side like chemicals. They do not combine that active. They can be so combined that active forces are released. So, these are some lines which you should not use in your answers. My purpose of using this paragraph from the book is this only, that I want to tell you how you should omit things which are not important from your answer when you're writing your examination. So, this has no meaning. If you can understand it and write it in your own words, that is a separate thing. Okay. Then the French Revolution, Methodism, ideal philosophy, which insist on the supreme importance of mind, and the work of Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge are all expression of creative forces working at different levels within the society. Broadly, romantic movement attempted to reassert God back into a living universe. And it placed a higher value on private vision than on general theories, which had degenerated into dogma. Dogma, which had become strict rules and nobody wanted to follow them. At its best, the Romantic movement added a new dimension to man's vision of life and the world about him, and was, as Coleridge was aware, a magnificent attempt to reconcile, please remember this, the heart and the head. Very significant, heart and the head. When you are giving weightage to your heart and to what your head is also saying, so emotions are playing equal role over here, and even your head for that matter, your brain. Now what marks the beginning of the event is the publication of lyrical ballads, as I mentioned yesterday also in the class. In 1798 by Wordsworth may be regarded as a founding event of romantic movement. The chief romantic poets being Wordsworth, Coleridge, there is Scott, Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So these are some of the poets. Apart from Wordsworth is prescribed for you, Coleridge is there, Shelley you don't have, Keats you have, and William Blake you have. So what we have to remember over here is that how it was a reaction against the 18th century norms, rules, regulations that were set to be followed in the 18th century. And also remember that in the 18th century, reason was given more weightage than emotions and feelings. Okay, and reason came to an end in the 19th century, or let us say the 18th century. Over here, it includes the early 18th and the pre 17th century also. Remember this, because obviously even our when I'm saying 1978, it means it is the beginning of the 18th century, but then there are pre romantics which we studied in the last part of our syllabus of history. Now we are studying the Romantic poets. So the Romantic age begins with this particular date. This is what you have to remember. Then let's move on after the introduction. Let us discuss the salient features of the Romantic poetry. So, the first and the foremost is the essential quality of Romantic poetry is emotion and imagination. In the neoclassical times, neoclassical poetry, there was main concern or main thrust of, let us say, poetry was reasoning was taking a lot of place, right? Lots of logical reasoning was followed. But in the 18th century or in the Romantic poetry, poems had a emotional appeal, right? And there was a significant role of imagination. There was more of creativity there. That was, now, things were not absolutely true to the real self, but then the emotions and the imagination played a significant role as far as Romantic poetry is concerned. Say, for example, you have Keats's poem La Bella Dame Sans Mercy. It is completely based on imagination. Or you have Kubla Khan by Coleridge, that is prescribed in your course. So that too has a imaginative appeal. It has an emotional appeal. It has an appeal to the heart of the readers, let us say. Okay, so this is about emotion and imagination. Next is nature. Now, when I talk of nature, the neoclassical poets, they talked of the inside nature, but the romantics, they focused on the human nature as well as the nature outside, that is the environment. And William Wordsworth, I hope you all must be knowing this, he is known as the greatest poet of nature because of his philosophy of pantheism, which we will discuss in detail when we discuss Wordsworth. So he believes the prevalence of God in every object of nature. And it is not just Wordsworth, but there are अदर पोइट्स ऑल्सो हु टॉक ऑफ नेचर. अगर आप अपने टाइटल्स ही देखें पोएम्स के, यू हैव ode to the west wind, you have ode to autumn. So the seasons are over there playing a significant role. So all nature poems whichever are there in Romantic poetry, they contain nature description as well as poet's love for nature. Obviously he is the greatest poet, but then there are other poets also, Keats for that matter, who have love for nature. Okay, simple enough. Next we come to humanitarianism. So with the happening of the French Revolution, there was a new concept that came into everybody's life, and that was liberalism was the freedom that people got from set rules that existed in the neoclassical age. And it so happened that the Romantic poets, they had sincere love for man and the spirit of man. Coleridge, for that matter, he showed enthusiasm as far as humanity is concerned, and he wrote about these people. These people, in the sense, he wrote about humans, and especially he wrote about the village folks, people who lived in the villages. Why? What was the reason for their simplicity? He wrote about them. Coleridge also shows love for humanity in his reflections on having left a place of retirement, and he also showed admiration, or he also showed an inclination to serve the humanity. So this is what humanitarianism is all about. That first of all, there was love for liberty. People wanted that freedom, and more weightage or more of characters from the village life could be seen in the poems written by the Romantic poets. RP, romantic poets. Next and very significant is the lyricism. Lyrics se lyricism bana. I hope you all know about that. And what we have to remember is that these poems or the poets of the romantic poets, they wrote deeply personal poems, right? Revealing their own nature. इसीलिए subjective है. They talk about their personal feelings, their own nature, their feelings, and their thoughts. That is why I'm saying they wrote subjective poetry. These poets were deeply subjective. And this subjectivity led them to write what? It led them to write lyrics. Lyrics basically songs. And almost all the romantic poets, they have written fine lyrics. They have fine lyrics to their credit. So, lyricism is about subjectivity, which means the writers, the poets are presenting their own feelings, personal nature, and their thoughts. Next, supernaturalism, as the term suggests, and you can understand it better. What supernaturalism is all about. Coleridge is known as the greatest master of supernaturalism in his poem that is prescribed to you, The Ancient Mariner. Now, what a supernaturalism is something that does not belong to the real aspect of life. Supernaturalism is an outstanding romantic quality. It gives to certain poems an atmosphere by virtue of which romantic poetry is often called as Renaissance of wonder. Renaissance of wonder. Because of this, romantic poetry is called the Renaissance of wonder. And it is not just Coleridge, but Keats also, for that matter. John Keats is also known for giving supernatural touch to his poems. His significant work, which has supernaturalism as its theme, is La Bella Dame Sans Merci. Very, very significant. Ancient Mariner by Coleridge is obviously in our course, so we will study that and we will go into the depth of what are the various aspects of supernaturalism poetry written by romantic poets, for that matter, right? Next is almost all the romantic poets, they drew upon what? They drew upon the 11th century, what we call the Middle Ages, for their inspiration and for their passion, for their bravery, chivalry जिसको हम बोलते हैं, and for art. So they kind of took inspiration from the poets of the 11th century or the Middle Ages. They talked of distant lands, distant होती है far off, distant lands, and they talked of past ages that have gone by. That is why I'm saying the Middle Ages or the 11th century. This you can connect to Greek mythology also, which I will come to later. Next is the melancholy note. Melancholy का मतलब होता है sad. There is a sad note, a note of melancholy in romantic poetry. And what kind of sadness is there? There is nostalgia basically. Sadness क्यों है? Sadness है nostalgia. Nostalgia क्या होता है? When you remember something of the past and you feel bad about it, उसे nostalgia बोलते हैं. Nostalgia for past glory or experience of sadness. Right? Byron shows this melancholy in his poem Lake Lemons. And Coleridge and Keats, they have significant poems that have a melancholic note, that is Ode to Dejection by Coleridge, though it is not in your course, and Ode to Melancholy ही नाम है Keats's poem, Ode to Melancholy by John Keats, right? So, this is the melancholic note, the sad note, which is prevalent in the works of the romantic poets. Last of all, and very, very significant, is the style. Now, as far as the style is concerned, these people, for that matter, these people in the sense, the romantic poets, they introduced several new meters and stanza forms. Now, if I have to just explain it to you in simple terms, it means the musical quality of the poems written by the by the RPs, that is romantic poets, was totally outstanding. That is what it means. Okay, the musical quality. So the style and the lyricism is somewhat the same. Lyrics, because it was subjective, and style, they introduced new meters, which means it has a outrightly different musical quality. It was melodious. Those their poems could be even sung as a song. That is what it means. So, and last, not very very significant, but yes, because under this category, some poets do come. That is, there is love for love for beauty, sensuous love जिसको हम बोलते हैं, and this you will find in Keats, sensuous love for beauty. Now, please keep this thing in mind, that beauty over here pertains to the nature, and it also pertains to man. It also pertains to man, the beauty of man, the beauty of nature outside. And there are some real good thoughts that have come up. Say, for example, Keats had said that beauty is truth and truth is beauty, vice versa. This we will study in the poem from which it comes. By Keats has said this. And Shelley says, a thing, आपने सुने भी होंगे ये thoughts, a thing of beauty is joy forever. So, forever, it should be one word. So these quotes or these beautiful lines come from the sensuous love of poetry, which gives these poems the chief quality of being a romantic poem, right? And Keats, for that matter, from where did he get his sensuous charm for beauty or love for beauty? It goes back to the Greek mythology. He'll talk of we have a poem, Ode to the Grecian urn. There is this urn, a matka, an urn, a vase he has. It has everything about the Greek mythology, and he discusses that particular thing in that poem, Ode to the Grecian urn. So, these are minor characteristics which we also find in the poems of the romantic poets. Now, these particular, let us say, 8 for that matter, this too you can include in your answers, but our framework sets into these 9 or 8 points which are there, and in this framework you have to place the poet under study. Whichever poet we are studying, आप इस framework के अंदर उनको set करेंगे. Out of these features, what features belong to Wordsworth? What features belong to Keats? What features belong to Blake, for that matter? Or what features belong to Coleridge? Right? So this is the most significant part before we venture into discussing the poems. So I hope I've made myself clear to you. You've been able to grasp this concept. And in case of any doubt, obviously we will have interaction sessions offline. That's all for today. Thank you so much. Keep your questions ready.